Neama Rahmani, he is a former federal prosecutor and also the president of the West Coast Trial Lawyers Association. He joins us this morning from Los Angeles. And Mr. Rahmani, thanks for being with us as always. As jury selection in this case continues, it has now become apparent just how closely connected this community is to the prospective jurors. And the jurors are actually telling us more about what they know about the defendants and other key players involved in this case. Are you surprised that this trial has not been moved out of Glynn County from the get-go?
I'm not surprised because the defense attorneys for the McMichaels and Roddy Bryant have made it clear that they like this conservative jury pool out there in Glynn County, Georgia, really a rural part of the state. So, compare and contrast that to the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd trial, where the defense attorneys in that case really wanted to move the case out of Minneapolis to a more conservative part of the state. The defense attorneys here want to keep the case where it is.
I want to ask you something that I keep bringing up to other legal experts we have on the show, which is that something new in this case is that the jurors are being asked if they feel threatened, when it comes to sitting on this jury. And I think that the judge should go one step further and say, who do you feel is threatening you? Because as you heard Dre say, these have been peaceful demonstrations. And so far, at least to my knowledge, there hasn't been a case where black protesters go into a jail and drag someone out and seek justice that way. But we have seen a history of that in white America. So should the judge be more specific? And if it winds up being that they're concerned about white supremacy, is there a place where a jury can be seated that wouldn't be the case?
Not at all. This is a case that has national and international attention. Everyone has seen the video of Ahmaud Arbery being shot and killed. There's no part of this country that would be immune from that type of pressure. And ultimately, in every case, the judge needs to ask the jurors the following question. Can you decide this case based on the facts and evidence of this case, what you hear in the courtroom, not what you hear in the press, not what you hear in the media, not what you hear outside the courthouse? Because ultimately, a case like this is going to get attention, and the jurors are going to hear those news and media reports regardless of where it is.
So are you saying, from your perspective, that the fact that this is one of those towns where everybody knows your name is not going to be a factor that favors the defendants in this case?
Well, it will favor the defendants. That's why they want to keep it here. Ultimately, those change of venue motions, those are made by defense attorneys when they argue that their client cannot get a fair trial where it is. But again, in this particular case, they feel confident that maybe they can get one or two jurors based on Georgia's citizens arrest and self-defense laws that will agree that the McMichaels acted reasonably. Certainly not what I agree as a former prosecutor, but that is the defense strategy and the clear one here based on what they've told to media outlets.
Neama, what's the question that you would want to ask in voir that is not being asked?
What I would ask is this. This is a case where if you're a prosecutor and you're either a federal or state prosecutor, you really want to go in a different direction. Because normally as a prosecutor, you want older, conservative jurors that really believe in law enforcement, former military types, but that's not what you want here. If you're a prosecutor in this particular case, you want jurors that are going to be more sensitive to issues of systemic racism, police brutality, and misconduct. Because let's not forget, the McMichaels, at least Gregory, is former law enforcement, former police officer, former DA investigator, and you don't want those jurors that you would typically want that would favor law enforcement. So those are the types of questions that I would ask if I were the prosecutor in this case.
And if I am a potential black juror, what should my concerns be about being seated on this particular case?
I don't think there should be any concerns if you're a black juror. I mean, if you are the prosecutor, you want a very diverse jury. Again, we're going back to Derek Chauvin, where we had half or more than half of the panel were people of color, because they're going to be more sensitive to issues like jogging while black, those systemic racism issues. So if you're the prosecution, you want to make sure that you do everything you can to make sure that the defense is not striking those jurors of color based on race, because you need a diverse panel in this case if you're the prosecution.
In these toxic times that we live in, should the judge guarantee a jury that once the trial is over, their names would remain anonymous unless they choose to want to go public?
Most of the time, the judges will make that accommodation in a high profile case like this, allow the jurors to retain their anonymity. Even so far, in terms of the cameras being allowed in the courtroom, they've only been allowed for the group questioning, not the individual juror questioning. So, to the extent that a juror is on this panel, either as a seated juror or an alternate, if he or she want to remain anonymous after the trial is over, that's something that will be an option to them.
And final question before I let you go. The demonstrators out in front, do they stay or do they go? And if they go, if the judge forces them to go, does that wind up being grounds for appeal?
Well, certainly the protesters, demonstrators, they have an absolute First Amendment right to be there. And already the First Amendment groups, the media groups, have filed motions to gain greater access to that courtroom. So I don't think it will be a ground to appeal the verdict in the case, a potential guilty verdict, but I would expect that if the judge grants any type of order saying that those protesters must be removed, that there would be a group that would intervene and appeal on their behalf, and that appeal would very likely be successful.
Neama Rahmani is the former federal prosecutor and also president of the West Coast Trial Lawyers Association. He joins us from LA. Mr.